Hi, welcome back to our lesson number 2. It's Science 30, Unit 1. This lesson is on blood vessels. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following. So you're going to recognize these. A lot of these outcomes are the same ones that you did in the last lesson. But our focus now is on those specific blood vessels. This last point here, describe the structure and function of blood vessels and the flow of blood through the arteries, arterioles, venules, veins, and capillaries. That's our focus of this lesson. The material I'm covering in this lesson is from textbook pages 6 to 19, so make sure you review those afterwards. So the three main types of blood vessels that that are in your body are the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. Now, the arteries, they usually carry oxygen-rich blood, and they're always carrying blood away from the heart. So arteries are always going away from the heart, and they branch into smaller arteries that are often called arterioles. Then we have veins, and these carry blood towards the heart, and they start out as smaller veins called venules, and they increasingly get larger as you get closer to the heart. Usually they carry oxygen-poor blood, except remember the pulmonary artery and pulmonary vein is always the exception to these. And then there's capillaries. These are the tiny vessels separating the arteries and veins, where the gases and nutrients and other materials can go from the from the blood into the cells, back and forth. So there is a video in these slides if you didn't watch this video, or if you want a further explanation of blood vessels that you can watch. It's a great video. So a little bit more on these main types of blood vessels. So we have coming from the heart. If you're a blood cell and you're coming from the heart, you would be in an artery first off. And the arteries, you can see, have a very thick layer here. They have very thick muscular walls, and the inside diameter is quite small compared to the vein over here. As these arteries get smaller, we call them arterioles, and you'll notice that the muscle lining is a little thinner and thinner. Then they get smaller and smaller, and they turn into capillaries. Now, capillaries are only 1 cell thick, so they're very, very thin, so that the oxygen and nutrients can get out of them into the blood, into the tissues surrounding the vessels, and then the waste from those tissues can be picked up easily by the blood inside the capillaries. Then that blood continues, and it will be in a vessel that's called a venule, and there's lots of space inside there for that blood to go, and then into a vein, which is a bit bigger wall than the venule, but nothing like the artery. So the arteries have these really, really thick walls because they are taking blood that is coming directly under very big pressure from the heart. So they have to deal with all that pressure that heart pumps and pushes that blood through. So they have to be able to expand and then contract when the blood's not in there. So the arteries can really expand quite a bit when the heart contracts. And then when the heart's not contracting, the arteries are contracting back to their regular size, and that actually helps push the blood through and keeps it going in the one direction. Now, veins are under a lot less pressure, right? Because the blood is high pressure in the arteries, but then it's going through the capillaries and slowing down, and it's pretty slow when it gets to the veins here, so it's not quite the pressure, because it's that much farther from the heart. So because it doesn't have the pressure to move the blood through, it uses valves and the muscles that surround the veins to help push it through. But it also means it doesn't have to have these thick walls. And we'll look at the next slide. It talks more about that. Oh, and the slide after. Sorry, we'll get back to veins. So we're just going to take a little diversion into capillaries, and you can see this is a great picture from a microscope. You can see there's a capillary, a single capillary, and you can see these are the red blood cells, and the capillary only allows one red blood cell through at a time. Really, right? It's a chain of red blood cells. It's that thin, so only one cell can go through at a time. So that nutrients can be transferred to those tissues. This is a cell. This whole thing, there's a cell in your body, so that oxygen can come in and it can get rid of its carbon dioxide nicely. Anyway, so these capillaries are spread throughout the body everywhere. If you cut your little finger anywhere, you're going to get a little bit of blood. That's from a capillary bed that you're cutting. And here are the capillary beds. It's just a whole whack of capillaries. The capillaries have to be able to get blood to every single cell in your body. So every cell needs a capillary near it. So yeah, the capillary wall is a single layer of cells are just large enough for the largest blood cell to pass through. As blood flows from the arterioles to the capillary beds, it slows down dramatically because of the increase in the cross-sectional area, which I'll have another slide that explains that a little bit more too. Alrighty. All right, so veins. Let's take another look at veins again. And you can see this is a microscopic cross image of a vein and an artery. You can see the artery wall so wide, but the inside of the artery is not quite as big as like the inside of the vein. But you can see the wall is a lot thinner and it's a much more irregular shape, not quite that solid tube. So the way that blood is transferred back up to the heart through the veins, because there's not under much pressure because you don't have the heart really near it as much, it uses the muscles surrounding the vein. You can see how the muscles, when they contract, they squeeze the veins. And the veins have valves. Every so often there's a valve. You can see there's a valve here, and there's a valve here, and they're one-way valves. So they only let blood travel back up towards the heart. So when you squeeze this vein, the blood's going to try and squish out both ends, but the valve here stays closed. It locks so that the blood can only push out. When it releases, the blood can come in from below, it sucks it up, and then another contraction helps push that blood back up. So really, veins depend a lot on the muscles surrounding them to help move that blood and the one-way valves. Oh, here's the great picture here. There we go. There's a diagram of how the one-way valves work. Any blood moving backwards or coming back down towards your feet helps actually close those valves, so it gets stuck here. And then you muscles squeeze that valve and smoosh that blood up back towards the heart. Okay. So there are some issues. If you've got really damaged valves or leaky valves, you can get something called varicose veins, and the blood starts to pool and hang out down here, and those veins, the walls become really weak and stretched. So that's where you get the varicose veins. Sometimes too much standing can cause that. And there was a good video here of how those valves work. It's 11 seconds, but you can see how they stop. Anytime the wants to move backwards, that blood going down to the toes, it stops the backflow. But here is where you have a varicose vein, where you have leaky valves, so that blood is just not making it anywhere. It's going back and forth. So it's not moving in just one direction like it's supposed to. All right, so this is where we talked about the blood pressure. First off, it's really high, right? Blood pressure. So, well, what is blood pressure? First off, it's the pressure that the blood exerts against the inside of the vessel walls. Okay, so when the blood is in an artery, that pressure pushing against the inside of the artery walls, that is the blood pressure, right? So as you get farther from the heart, that pressure on the walls of the vessels is going to be a lot less, right? That's why veins have to rely on other things to get that blood back to the heart. They don't have the pressure from the heart. So blood pressure high in arteries, blood pressure low in veins. Okay, goes that way. Now, these two scales are looking at speed, so velocity, and then the area of the cross-sectional area of where the blood is going through here. So the speed of the blood in the arteries is very fast, right? As soon as it gets to the capillaries, it slows down quite a bit. Now, this is because the capillaries have a lot of area. So if you think of this as a river, so the arteries are like a river and they're all rushing down the same one narrow channel, so you've got a lot of pressure happening. Then the channels start to break and branch, and every time they branch, it adds more and more area. And this river here would be a lot more shallow and slow and meandering. So this is why the velocity drops so dramatically in the capillaries. So the blood really slows down quite a lot in the capillaries so that it can do its job of transferring oxygen and picking up the carbon dioxide. It's because there's such a great surface area in the capillaries, because it has to reach all those different cells. So it has to break and branch into so many capillaries. All right. Measuring blood pressure. So unfortunately, we don't have sphygmomanometers. That's what these blood pressure cuffs are called, to give everybody to do this lab at home. But if you have a chance to go into a drugstore and get your blood pressure taken, give that a try and see if you can understand how the machine is working after having looked at this lesson. So blood pressure is measured in units called millimeters of mercury, and the normal blood pressure is roughly around 120 over 80. All right. So it's expressed as two numbers. The 120 refers to the systolic pressure, and this is the pressure when the ventricles in your heart, remember systole? Systolic pressure is when your ventricles are contracting. The number below is the diastolic pressure, and that's when the pressure from when the heart is not contracting. Okay, so it's measured, blood pressure is measured with a sphygmomanometer. Now, aren't you glad you watched the video? Because you'd be looking at that thinking, how do you pronounce that? Sphygmomanometer, otherwise known as a blood pressure cuff. Okay, so what the cuff actually does is the purpose of it is to stop the blood flow so that you can figure out what the pressure is. And I'll walk you through the steps of that. So I'm going to go ahead and then we'll come back to this. Yeah, so this is a good diagram here of how to take a blood pressure using a blood pressure cuff. All right, so what you do is you put this blood pressure cuff on and you grab a stethoscope so that you can hear the pressure. So if you have your stethoscope on right now, this cuff, you see how tight it is? It's got to be above the 120. So you usually start at around like 160, 150 millimeters of mercury pressure, so that the blood can't get through the artery of your arm, the brachial artery. Okay, so you're quickly stopping the blood at this point. So you shouldn't hear any kind of sounds when you have your stethoscope up here. So you're pumping up the air of your cuff, your sphygmomanometer, to block all that blood. All right, then you slowly, there's a little knob on here, you slowly let the air out so that this cuff expands. And as it expands, you're listening for sounds in the stethoscope. All right, as soon as you hear a whoosh, whoosh, that means some blood is getting through when those ventricles are pumping, right? Whoosh, whoosh. When those ventricles are pumping, that first sound that you hear, that whatever that number is on your sphygmomanometer on your blood pressure cuff, you want to record that, because that is the systolic pressure. Okay, your first blood pressure point. So that might be around the 120 mark. That would be the average. And then you continue to listen and you slowly let more and more air out. And the whole time you're probably hearing whoosh, whoosh. You should be able to hear that blood coming through. Boom, boom, you hear something. You might also see it bounce up and down on this pressure gauge. That's how I actually tend to do it. When all of a sudden that pressure gauge just starts going down and doesn't do any kind of little jumps, so you're not seeing any of where the ventricles are pumping in the heart, and you don't hear anything else, that is your diastolic pressure and your lower pressure, the 70 here. So you get the 120 first when the blood starts rushing out, and the 70 millimeters of mercury when the blood is just sitting at normal. Like there's no, that's the pressure that doesn't stop the blood from flowing. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, rewind, listen to it again. Maybe it'll make sense a second time. If not, get a hold of your teacher. All right. So, what's the big deal about blood pressure? Well, if you have high blood pressure or hypertension, it can cause a lot of problems, serious problems down below, like heart attack, strokes, kidneys. So this is something that whenever you go to the doctor, they always take your blood pressure because it's something that they can look at and adjust if we need to. So some of the things that cause high blood pressure here: inactive lifestyle, obesity, excessive alcohol, salt, stress. Sometimes it's hereditary and you can't do a whole lot about it. Race and increasing age as you get older. All right, so what would an increase in blood pressure? What would increase blood pressure? So why are these activities causing an increase in blood pressure? Well, the next slide is going to show that. But if you decrease the diameter of a blood vessel, so if you take that tube like an artery and you make it smaller, tighter, and the blood has to force its way through it, it's a lot harder to get the blood through. So you're building up a lot of pressure. Or if you have even more blood, that'll actually also increase your blood pressure because you got more blood to push around. So some of the reasons that we can get high blood pressure is because this fatty material can build up inside the arteries. You can see it here, and it becomes hard, and because of that, it creates a lot less space for that blood to get through, and that causes the high blood pressure or hypertension because there it's a lot narrower now. There's a good microscopic picture of it. All right, with the fats are all deposited in there, yuck. Anyway, and because they're under so much pressure, the arteries could rupture from that pressure, or it can knock off these plaques and you can get blood clots forming, or yeah. And so if you've got really bad circulation or you have a lot of that plaque building up, you're going to start to get some poor blood circulation and not enough oxygen to the heart, and that's where you can get some of this angina pain. So this is a temporary pain, but it's because your heart's not getting enough blood to feed it. Then we mentioned heart attack a while back too, and that's when your coronary arteries, the arteries that feed the heart, get completely blocked, and so your heart's not getting any blood, no oxygen, and it starts to die. The heart muscle starts to die. So heart attacks, and so they can be caused by smoking and high cholesterol and all those other high blood pressure issues. Stroke. Same idea as a heart attack, but instead of blocking the artery to the heart, you're blocking the artery to the brain, an artery to the brain, some kind of vessel there. So if you block that area of the brain too long and it doesn't get fed by the blood and nutrients and oxygen, it will die and cause tissue damage, and it might not be coming back. So it's, we talk about damage becomes significant after about 4 minutes. So some of those symptoms of a stroke are weakness to one side, trouble speaking, and paralysis on one side. And then aneurysms. This is when you get a weak spot in your artery, and they can be quite dangerous and can rupture and cause death if you have got those. So it's like a bulge in the artery wall. There's like a good visual of that there. So just a few of the disorders and diseases of the circulatory system there. We do have another lesson on that near the end, so I'll leave that there for now. And these are some references that were used to create this video slides. So this is a great time to go work on your notes. You could use the slide presentation for your notes and practice questions, and then try your self-check. Ciao.